boys and girls, it's Miss Rachel here again, coming live from Literacy Mid-South to read a great book to you. Now, yesterday we started reading a book called The Oldest Student, How Mary Walker Learned to Read. Do you remember anything about that book? It said the oldest student, but so far, is she so old? No, when we left off, she was only 20 years old, so we have to keep digging deeper into this book to find out how is she the oldest student. Now, I hope you have not forgotten the vocabulary words we discussed yesterday, but just in case you have, we're going to quickly review them. Garments. What are garments? Clothes. You got it. You got it. Abandoned. What does abandon mean? Oh my God, y'all are so smart. To be left behind or forgotten about. Civil rights. I heard someone say, Dr. Martin Luther King, you're correct. He is on here and he fought for our civil rights, but that is treating everyone equally. Our next word, billboards. Okay, a board outside, that's right, but what does the board have on it? Information, that's right. And our last word is cockpit. What is a cockpit? A room in a plane, okay, but who is that room or that space for? The pilot and the crew. Oh my God, y'all are so smart. So let's dig deep back into Mary Walker, how she learns to read, the oldest student. One day, Mary's husband died. She married again, and a second son was born. Then a third. Mary made marks for these sons too. Now she had 3 growing boys. More money. That's what we need, Mary thought. But the only other jobs available to black women were as maids or nannies or cooks. The hours were long, with only a half day off on Saturdays. And like sharecropping, that didn't pay much either. Mary sighed. Words would have to wait for the next 4 decades. Now, does anyone know how long a decade is? A decade is 10 years, so it says for the next 4 decades. So how long was that? Let's count. 10, 20, 30, 40. So for the next 40 years, Mary sharecropped and did odd jobs to support her family. In 1917, still a long time ago, Mary's family moved to a little city of Chattanooga, Tennessee. So she moved to our great state of Tennessee. Has anybody ever visited Chattanooga? I have. They have a wonderful aquarium there that I love to visit. It was the year of Chattanooga's Great Flood. Great Flood, tons of water. The story was in all the newspapers, but Mary could only study the pictures to understand what had happened. So it said that she can only study the pictures. Why? That's right. She hasn't learned to read yet. She has not learned to read yet. Has she had time? No, she hasn't. She's been working. By now, Mary was 68 and too old to sharecrop, but she continued to work, cooking, cleaning, and babysitting. She also fried fish, baked cakes, and sold sandwiches to raise money for her church. On Sundays, she would sit in the congregation, and as the preacher spoke, she would clutch her family Bible, the Bible she still couldn't read. So even though she couldn't read the Bible, did she throw it away or put it to the side? Nope, she kept it near and dear to her heart because she was determined she was going to read one day. When Mary was well past 90, so imagine she's 90 now, she and her husband sat in their creaky rockers. What's a rocker? A rocking chair, you're correct, while one or another one of her sons read to them. After the 2 younger boys died, the eldest read. Then Mary's husband died. Several years later, her eldest son died too. He was 94. He was 94 when he died. Now remember, she had him when she was 20. So my mathematicians, do you know what 20 plus 94 is? Ponder on that for a second. Mary outlived her entire family. She was 114 years old and alone. Her husband had died. Her 3 sons had died. But guess what? She was still here at how old? 114 years old. Can't read, she said. Can't read? I don't know anything. Mary stood at the window of her retirement home and gazed down at the world below. Words were everywhere. On billboards, did you catch it? Yes. On buildings, on store windows and trucks. She sighed. All this time, she thought, and they still look like squiggles. So she is 114 years old, living alone. Her husband is deceased, and so are her sons. Now, why do you think she never asked anyone for help in learning how to read? Okay, she may not have had time. Okay. She was working. Okay. You're right, she could have been embarrassed being at this age. Now, how do you think she feels after losing her husband and her 3 sons? Yes, I think so too. She's probably very sad, very sad. Mary had heard about a new reading class held in her building. She pursed her lips. No more waiting, she decided. Time to learn. Out of her apartment, into an elevator, and down the lobby she went. When the elevator door sprang open, Mary saw people sitting under a sign with a picture of an open book. She could not read the words. A neighbor walked up to her. "That's a reading class, Miss Mary. Can I help you over?" Mary shook her head. Then she gripped her cane, lifted her chin, and walked straight toward that sign. So, at 114 years old, is she going to learn to read? Let's see. Let's see what happens on the next few pages. For the next year and more, Mary put everything she had into learning to read. It wasn't easy after all. She was the oldest student in the class and probably in the entire country. Can you imagine going to school at 114 years old? I'm not even close, and I want to live a long time too. Could someone her age learn to read? She didn't know, but by God, she was going to try. She studied the alphabet until her eyes watered. She memorized the sounds each letter made and practiced writing her name so many times her fingers cramped. She learned to recognize sight words and then challenged herself to make short sentences with them. She studied and studied until books and pages and letters and words swirled in her head as she read. So first she learned the alphabet, right? When you have letters in the alphabet and you form them, what happens then? They form into words, that's right. And after words, what can we do? Form sentences, and after sentences for my upper grades, paragraph, pages. So she is learning how to read at what age? 114, you got it. One fine day, Mary's hard work paid off. She could read. Word of her accomplishment traveled, and people everywhere celebrated her. Chattanooga's mayor, newspaper journalists across the country, and a man from the U.S. Department of Education who said, "Ms.Mary Walker, I pronounce you the nation's oldest student." They all shared in her joy. So these are all the people who came to celebrate with her because she had been declared the oldest student in the United States. Now, do you think she's a little embarrassed because she's the oldest student? Let's look at her face. Does her face look like it's embarrassed? Not quite. She seemed to be very determined. Now, can you describe something you've learned to do that you didn't know before? Okay, ride a bike without training wheels. Skate without the guardrail. Okay. Learn to write sentences. I love it, I love it, I love it. But guess what? Did you give up? No, you did not. You were able to accomplish your goal. And that is what we do. Mary felt complete. She still missed her sons. But whenever she was lonely, she read from her book. What book was that? Her Bible, that's correct. And looked out her window and read the words on the street below. Now, where could she read those words? One of our vocabulary words. Billboards, that's correct. From then on, Chattanooga honored Mary's achievement with yearly birthday parties. In 1966, guess what? Ms. Rachel still wasn't born then. President Lyndon B. Johnson sent well wishes on Mary's 118th birthday. She's still alive at 118 years old. And in 1969, President Richard Nixon did the same. By now, Mary was 121 years old. Can you believe it? Do you know anybody that's 121 years old? I don't. My great-grandmother lived to be 96 and my grandmother lived to be 94. Mary received many gifts over the years. A radio, a sofa, her first television set, a new Bible, the key to the city, and perfume and champagne from the Canadian mountains. She also received something that brought back those long days in the Alabama cotton fields. Her first airplane ride. From the cockpit, did you catch it? You did. From the cockpit window, Mary gazed at the trees and rooftops below. No different than a horse and a buggy ride, she joked, but she knew that it was. As the airplane dipped and soared just like those swallowtail kites a long time ago, Mary decided that flying was a lot like reading. They both made her body feel as free as a bird. Each year, before her birthday celebration came to an end, someone would whisper, "Let's listen to Miss Mary." The shuffling and movement would fade away until not a sound was heard. Then Mary would stand on her old legs, clear her old throat, and read from the Bible or her school book in a voice that was clear and strong. Look at all those people waiting to listen to her read. When she finished, she would gently close her book and say, "You're never too old to learn." Now, why do you think people continue to celebrate Miss Mary? After all this time, even after she learned to read at 114, she didn't die until she was 121. Why do you think they continue to celebrate Miss Mary? But yes, she was the oldest student, and did she ever give up? She never gave up. She accomplished her goal of learning to read, even when she was 8 years old, a slave on an Alabama plantation. Boys and girls, I hope that you have really enjoyed this book. This is now becoming one of my favorite books, and I can't wait to see you tomorrow to dig deeper into the vocabulary. Thank you.